I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and you are looking at Titan by Naxit Soft, which, as we all know from previous episodes of the PC Engine Files, Naxit is an anagram for Taxon, which is a subsidiary of Kaga Tech Company Limited that still sold games under the Naxit Soft brand well into the late 90s, but they were most famous for making PC Engine games in the late 80s and early 90s, so many of which have been featured on this channel, and so many more probably will be in the future. But what I want to say about Titan to get started, as you notice that it's obviously an Arkanoid clone, is I didn't know it was an Arkanoid clone until I started playing. I went into this without any knowledge, without having read about it in advance. I wanted to discover what Titan was for myself. And let me tell you, based on the title, I had several different thoughts, and one of them was not Arkanoid clone. My first guess was that it was going to be a mech type game or a Gundam type game with gigantic titanic robots, and that obviously isn't the case. The second thought I had was that it might be an anime derived series, like Attack on Titan, even though that obviously came much, much later than this game. Well, I should say the anime came much later than this game. I don't know if the manga it's based on might have been around way back then. I didn't even think to look that up. But neither of these turns out to be the case. It's an Arkanoid clone, but it takes a unique tack on it in that you're controlling a ball that breaks the bricks on both the X and Y axis. You're not just moving your paddle along a horizontal plane. You control the horizontal and the vertical, as they would say in the intro to The Outer Limits. That might be a very dated reference for some of you, but this is also a very dated game, so I think it's actually appropriate to make that joke right now. It's not a bad game, because I do like Arkanoid breakout type clone games. I have no problem with them. I enjoy brick ball breaking, even the simplistic games like Alleyway for Game Boy. That one often gets chided for being a very weak game on the Game Boy, but it was one of the first 8 Game Boy games I ever had, and I never saw cause to complain about it because I enjoy breakout type games. So for me, it was always fun to plug in the Game Boy to the wall adapter and play it for half hour, couple hours at a time. Because when you only have a handful of games, you make the most of what you have. Which is also why I never really understood the complaints about Castlevania Adventure that I heard later as an adult. Because to me, having a Castlevania game was better than not having any Castlevania game at all. And the music is so good in that game that it absorbed me into the world, and I did not even notice that it was, quote, clunky and slow. The only complaint I had back then was that some of the jumps were a little hard to make, but it didn't even occur to me to analyze that was because the game was moving at such a slow pace. I was just happy that it looked and felt like a Castlevania game, and it was the only Castlevania game I physically owned at the time. And then it got stolen, so that's a whole nother story that I won't go into here. But back to Titan. You cannot find very much information about this game if you go looking online. Maybe there's a dedicated PC Engine site written entirely in Japanese that I wouldn't be able to read that really goes in depth about it, but the limited English resources that I have access to don't say a whole lot. I do know that it was released March 15th, 1991 in Japan. That's a start. I found that out on the PC Engine Software Bible, and their description takes less than 10 seconds to read. A twist on the breakout theme. Titan has you bounce one of many balls around a maze, nudging them to alter direction to clear the way of blocks. There. That's their entire summary of the game. They have no more or less to say than that. Now, the Wikipedia entry is slightly more in-depth, but basically touches on the exact same themes. It says that this was published in France in 1988 and converted to PC Engine by Naxxit Soft in 1991, and again notes that you control the paddle moving on an X and Y axis, and notes that you control many balls, not just one. While I have not progressed far enough into the game that I am controlling many balls, I have to complete the first set of levels before I get to that challenge. And as far as their view of the reception, it lacks a citation, but it still says the following. The game has interesting graphics for its time and an original concept. However, it is criticized by some for bad controls and irritating effects, like the ball sometimes flying off in an unpredictable direction. And even though there's no citation to back that up, I'll back that up. You can plug me into the review right now if you want, because I would say the exact same thing. You can try to angle the ball off this little square that you're moving around these mazes, but because it's not a paddle, and because you're not working with one axis but two, it is very hard to time your hits on the ball to make it bounce the direction you want. And sometimes when you get into the right spot and things careen off of walls, you just stay there and hope that by dumb luck you're breaking the blocks if you just don't move and the ball keeps bouncing off your paddle. That's not really my biggest complaint about Titan. And actually, I don't have that many complaints because I ended up playing this for over 10 minutes. And if it was a really subpar PC Engine game or I absolutely hated the experience, it would be a sub 10 minute video. So you know that I'm not completely opposed to Titan. As I said earlier, I do like Arkanoid games and Breakout games and brick ball paddle games. But my biggest complaint, if I were to issue one, would be the scrolling. It is very jerky when you are moving around the maze to find the ball and hit it with your paddle. It's not as bad as an isometric 3D game like Sonic 3D Blast, but it is very irritating to the eye. The wiki entry used the word irritating, and I'm not irritated by the physics. I'm irritated by the way the screen scrolls when I move the paddle around, and it just feels like everything blurs. Ironically enough, like a Game Boy, like an early Game Boy, if it was a really fast game, the graphics would blur as the screen tried to keep up with the refresh rate and couldn't do it, which is why Castlevania was so slow, because that LCD screen could only refresh at a certain rate, and they didn't really improve upon that technology very much until the Game Boy Color. Not to say that handhelds in general didn't have this problem. You'll find Game Gear games with screen blur. If you use a Turbo Express, you'll find some games with screen blur, but Game Boy games, because of the monochrome or green shades of 4 colors and the low battery output LCD, which made for a long battery life but not very good refresh rates on the screen, yeah, blurring could be a big problem. And you really shouldn't have that happening on a TurboGrafx 16 or a PC Engine game. You shouldn't feel like when you move around the screen, it can't keep up with redrawing the tiles in either the X or the Y direction, but it scrolls smoothly and not smoothly at the same time. And it's just, I don't even know how to explain that. It's almost like you're moving a mouse around a screen, except the mouse stays in the center instead of moving around the screen, and everything moves around the mouse. That's actually a good explanation of what it feels like. I, off the top of my head, just came up with that, and it actually sums it up quite well. It's like your whole screen is moving around the mouse instead of your mouse moving around the whole screen, and it kind of gives you a headache after a while. It takes away from what would otherwise be a much more enjoyable game. And as you can see, I'm now controlling multiple balls, so the action does pick up when you get to the second stage. And I commend Naxxit Soft, Tax, and Kaga, whatever you want to call them, for putting a level select at the beginning of the game, so if you aren't playing this on an emulator and you're playing it on an actual card and you make so much progress and then you're like, I'm done, and turn it off, you can actually start at the level you want to instead of having to play it all the way from the beginning. I also think they've done some interesting things with brick out bonus blocks that you can pick up. The T obviously gives you extra time to complete a level, which is very helpful. I haven't quite figured out what the other ones do yet. I think one enables you to stop the ball on a dime like a magnet, but I can't reliably do that every single time I want it to. I'm not able to just push a button on the controller and always have that work, so I think that's the function, but I can't guarantee it. And there's one that looks like a bomb that I just have not even figured out what you do with that at all. But as this is a breakout clone, I think breaking the bricks is more important than the power-ups you pick up. You just need enough time to break them all, so the extra time is really the one you should focus on when you're playing. And if you want to pick up a copy of this game, it appears to be one of the more affordable PC Engine games that you can get as an import. I've seen listings of loose copies for $12 with free shipping, so it's like probably a $9 plus $3 or $4 shipping game if you think of it that way. Or you can find more complete copies for anywhere from $10 to $20, including factory sealed with free shipping for $20. So yeah, PC Engine games aren't cheap in general, but on the spectrum of just either stupidly common or insanely expensive like Sapphire, this is definitely at the lower end. So if you were looking for something to add to your library, this wouldn't be a bad way to go. I just wish the scrolling didn't bother me as much as it did, because I'm enjoying this game enough, but it's one of those games where it's like, it's actually going to be better for me to play it in short bursts and stage select and start from a stage rather than playing it over the long haul. And I admit here that this may be better if I load it up on the SSD 3, because maybe the blurring is an effect of the emulator and not so much the actual hardware. So I'm going to give it another shot once I load it on my micro SD card and play it there, so I don't hate this game. I don't think it's going to be anybody's top 10 list of all-time must-play TurboGrafx/PC Engine games, but it's okay, especially if you like breakout-type games. I think that's really going to be the key. If you like this genre of games, then Titan is one you should try in emulation and maybe buy a copy. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks for watching. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This is the PC Engine Files, and you're looking at Boken dun Shakudan the Lost Sunheart, also roughly translated as The Adventures of Don Baron, the Lost Sunheart. And this is one of those games. And what do I mean by those games? As a PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16 fan, that can mean several things, and in this case, it means all of them. First of all, the game has a visual style that would be understood by Japanese gamers who play Choaniki type games, where it's very surreal, very visually representative of anatomy and body parts. There's a certain cheeky humor to it that is just culturally part of the Japanese gaming landscape, where it's not really nearly that understood to a North American or a European audience. So if you haven't played those kind of games, it may not make sense to you. Even if you have, it may still not make sense to you. JonTron made a great point of that when he did his Japanese shoot 'em up games video. There's a lot that just doesn't translate, but if you enjoy shoot 'em ups, you can still have fun with it. Second of all, when I say it's one of those games, I do mean it is one of those expensive games. You are not getting a copy of Boken den Shakudan for anything less than $75. And if you want a complete copy, you're in the 3-digit mark immediately. The lowest cost copies I can find right now are $90 used incomplete and well over 100 complete. So it's one of those games. And the reason it's one of those games gets to the third point. Shoot 'em ups are part and parcel of what make TurboGrafx PC Engine collecting so desirable to a subset of the retro gaming culture. If you love shoot 'em up games, this is the console for you. And if you love this console and those type of games, you're probably prepared to go deep into pocket to get the kind of games that are fun for you, because everybody wants them, and the more obscure they are, the more people want them and the higher the price goes. So we've got that perfect trifecta here of weirdness, rarity, and popularity that escalates the price of a game. And I suspect that even in challenging times, this game will probably retain much of that value just because supplies of this game appear to be severely limited. There was apparently a low print run by the manufacturer, which was IMAX, and it's a later release for PC Engine TurboGrafx games. It came out in January of 1992, which means at this point it was going head-to-head with both the Mega Drive and the Super Famicom. And in a 3-horse race, the 8-bit generation, quasi-16-bit generation PC Engine was starting to lose ground very rapidly. And eventually, they were just no longer feasible. Even with the CD-ROM Turbo Duo that was pretty cutting edge for its time, they were still losing in a 3-man race, and ultimately they were not winning the console wars. But that doesn't mean they're forgotten, and that doesn't mean the games are forgotten either. You have plenty of ways to play them now. You can, of course, spend $100 or more for the original game. You can get a Turbo EverDrive and use it with a PC Engine or a TurboGrafx 16, or you can get a SSD 3, which is the enhanced version of an EverDrive that will also play backups of CD-ROM games and not just HuCard games. So there are plenty of choices, and emulation is also a viable choice as well. But don't expect to find this one on the TurboGrafx Mini / PC Engine Mini. It's too obscure even for that, which, again, that's one of the factors that's driving up the price of this game. Ironically, that PC Engine Mini I just referred to has a lot of the rare and valuable titles on it in almost all versions, both internationally and domestically. Games like Snatcher, which, even if they're not translated from Japanese to English, they're going to be highly coveted games. And of course, Rondo of Blood, which still remains one of the most expensive PC Engine games, save for, of course, Magical Chase. So I think you've got this situation here where it's just obscure enough to not be on a mini, but obscure enough to be coveted. So make of that what you choose, but try it out because it is difficult but fun. I'm having a hard time getting past this boss. This is obviously a battle where I've got to shoot out the eyeballs, but after I tried the first time, it separates between the body and the head, and I can't seem to destroy the body fast enough, and then the head becomes somehow invulnerable after that, and I haven't quite figured out what I'm doing wrong yet, but I'm intrigued enough by this game that I want to find out what I'm doing wrong and do better, and it certainly seems to have gotten some cultural cachet among video game sites that cover PC Engine, like Giant Bomb, who describes it as distinct among shoot 'em ups for allowing players to keep their power-ups after dying. That was not my experience because I didn't get any of those power-ups that I just had back after I died there, but maybe again there's something I'm missing, something I'm not doing. But I would say that this is a recommended game because this is not one where you're going to need a heavy knowledge of the Japanese language to be able to play it. Shoot 'em ups are also another asset of the TurboGrafx PC Engine library. Because of that, many of them are accessible because they're arcade action style shooting games that you don't need to have that depth in Japanese characters to understand. You just need to be able to shoot, move, and change weapons. And that's probably part of what I'm doing wrong here, is I don't have whatever button I need mapped to my controller to change weapons here. So, well, it's fun. And it's going to be fun for me to continue to explore Boken Denshaku Dan the Lost Sun Heart and see if I can figure out what else I'm missing. This brief summary of the plot from Giant Bomb won't help me figure it out, but will help you know more about it. The game's plot concerns the titular Sun Heart device, which is broken into several pieces and spirited away by a group of malicious eyeball enemies. The hero, in a series of vehicles, takes down each of the boss creatures that are protecting a piece of the stolen Sun Heart. So this is a quest of sorts to regain the lost Sun Heart, hence the title. But why is the Sun Heart so important, and why do we need to get it back? Nothing here in that summary explains that point, so that may just be lost in translation. And if there is an English patch of this that would translate that, please let me know, and I will happily play it that way on my Super SD System 3. Or maybe Sarumaru, with his working knowledge of Japanese that is far beyond mine, he might be able to understand the plot and explain it a little better. Perhaps even Corbin in Japan could do me a solid and tell me a little more, but I would say try this game whether you know Japanese or not, because I think you're going to enjoy it. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and as always, thank you for watching. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and today's regrettable life decision is called Idol Hanafuda Fan Club. It was made by Games Express. Games Express is best known for making Idol Hanafuda Fan Club. I don't know that it's intentionally a kusuge, but I had a bad feeling about it before I even clicked play, and once the girl wearing lace started winking at me on the title screen, I knew it was going downhill from there. This game is what results when you combine Leisure Suit Larry with Japanese playing cards known as Hanafuda, and it's every bit as terrible as you would imagine. There's nothing wrong with Hanafuda cards. In fact, I have a set of them that was made as part of Club Nintendo. You could redeem points for a set of Mario-themed Hanafuda cards. And it pays tribute to Nintendo's legacy because they started out as a playing card company long before they got into toys or video games. So Hanafuda is not the problem here. The girl winking at me with her jaundiced eyes on the title screen was the problem. And the girl wearing the pearl necklace beckoning me to play was the problem. And reading the description of the game online was definitely the problem. I quote from the PC Engine Software Bible, who has this short but accurate description. Version of the Japanese suit matching card game Hanafuda, but featuring stripping ladies as you progress. As you can imagine, we will not progress for that very reason. This video is short by necessity because I don't want to get to that point. I don't want to get to that point and get this video stricken on YouTube. I also don't want to get to that point personally because there's nothing titillating about these pixelated women who have skin that looks unhealthy and unnatural in 8-bit pixelated shades of color. Well, arguably TurboGrafx 16/PC Engine, quasi 16-bit. It's always been that fine line for me between an 8-bit and a 16-bit system, but there's a limited color palette available anyway, so there's nothing that makes me want to see anything beyond what they're already hinting at with the unnatural smile and the winking eye on the title screen. It's like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that either, to quote the great Steve Harvey. I guess there's a market for games like this because it's far from the first one on PC Engine. It's not the last one I'll end up covering at some point on this series, but this to me really mines the depths of what you can call a video game down to the bottom and scrapes the barrel and comes up with something filthy. you could get so much better titillation from an adult magazine, from a VHS tape of the same era. You know, one of those backroom tapes where you'd have to go behind the curtain. I'm sure Cinemassacre could explain better what I'm talking about. But the point is, if you're going to this for your jollies, you might as well be playing Custer's Revenge on Atari 2600, because it ain't going to be any better than that. And it's probably going to be in some respects worse, because this is not even a game where you can win or lose in a traditional sense like Custer's Revenge, which was sort of a reverse Kaboom, if you know that Activision game. This isn't even that. I couldn't figure out how to play, and then I realized it didn't even matter that I couldn't figure out how to play, because this game is very purposefully trying to let you win, because it's all about the softcore and it's not about the gameplay. There is no point to playing this game as an actual game. It is strictly here for the cheese. So I'm not even going to bother to tell you what this game goes for on eBay. I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't care. If this is your kind of thing, by all means, help yourself. Idol Hanafuda Fan Club had a disturbing name. The term idol gets used in some creepy, uncomfortable ways in certain areas, and this lived up to all of them. I was afraid of it before I clicked it, and I was right to be afraid. I have nothing against softcore or cheese, but this is just plain bad. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and today we're looking at 21 Iman Zaze Hotel U, also known as 21 Iman, aim to be the Hotel King. Now, some sources will tell you this is based on the 21 Iman anime, but the 21 Iman anime was itself based on the 21 Iman manga, so we should take it all the way back to the beginning and tell you about the manga, which is set in the far-flung year of 2018. Given it was written in 1968, I'm sure 2018 did seem like way far away, but now it's the recent past, at least as of the filming of this video. The manga tells the story of 18-year-old 21 Iman, heir to a long dynasty of hotel owners whose ancestor goes back to the Tokugawa shogunate. Unlike the manga, the anime is set between 2051 and 2071, so they tried to put it a little further in the future when they adapted it into a show. And there are also films based on it. One's called 21 Iman Uchi Iririshasi, probably butchering that, and another one's called 21 Iman to Space, the Barefoot Princess. So now you know there's a whole bunch of stuff that this video game could potentially be based on. But if you're watching the gameplay footage, you know something completely different. This is a board game. Yeah, you're thinking Mario Party, right? But this came out way before Mario Party, so maybe you could consider this to have been an influence on that instead of the other way around. But you could also consider games like Fortune Street on the Super Famicom and Rockman Board on the Famicom to be influences on both, so I guess it all depends on where the first board game in video games where you rolled dice and collected properties and kept them came from. Now, I say that knowing that you're probably thinking Monopoly, but I don't consider that the same thing, because Monopoly didn't have mini games, which is what sets 21 Iman Mazesu Hotel U apart, because you actually have to compete when you land on a space, and it turns out to be, at least the minigame that I played for this video, a simple to the right, mash the button as fast as you can to beat the other person in a one-on-one race type event. But since you can use this with a multi-tap, up to 4 people could be doing that at the same time. And I'm going to assume, without having played it further than I did for this video, that there are a whole variety of mini-games. What made the Mario Party series so addictive was the wide variety of mini-games, the lore of the Mario games they could draw upon, and how fun it was to play those mini-games even when you weren't playing the board games. You could go back and play them all on their own. So I don't think this would be the case with 21 Iman. I don't believe these games would be much fun outside of the context of the board game. And when you're playing 1 against 3 computer opponents, there's no trash talking. There's no, I just stole your star, which is kind of the thing that makes Mario Party so addictive, is getting into it with your friends and family. It's probably more fun with a multi-tap. It's probably more fun with human opponents. It's probably more fun if you can read Japanese. So there's a lot against this, and yet I'm enjoying it because the music is charming, the graphics are cute, the gameplay itself is not so unfathomable that you can't get through it even without knowing Japanese. You just can't read some of the menu options, but you can kind of fumble your way through it if you've ever played a rolling dice board game video game. So I would call this something I would recommend casually, except for one problem. 21 Iman Mazesi Hotelu was the very last Hue card for PC Engine, and that makes it a very expensive game to own physically. The lowest price you're going to find it for loose is $150, and if you want it complete, you're paying anywhere from $200 to $300. So buyer beware. This is a very unaffordable game for most people. You should probably play it in emulation or through a Super SD System 3, something other than owning it physically, because I really can't recommend spending $300 on this game if you're not somebody that's dead set on a complete collection of PC Engine games and has a lot of money to blow and both reads and speaks Japanese fluently. This probably wouldn't be for you. But why not try it in emulation? Just have a little fun with it. If there was an English patch of it, I could probably have even more fun with it than I'm having in this video. There's a lot of potential here. I'd really like to explore it further, but some of the competitive options in the menus, like the hotel properties, how you manage those, how you increase their value, I'm not going to be able to figure those out just on the basis of the language barrier. But I see promise here. It's not bad, it's just insanely expensive for PC Engine. Thanks for watching. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and you are looking at Dragon Egg from NCS and Messiah. Messiah is a name that you see a lot when it comes to the PC Engine, and generally with good results, which I would say applies to this game as well. Here's a brief summary from the PC Engine Software Bible that says, "A girl and her egg, all alone in the cruel world. This is not an ordinary egg. You can collect or buy power-ups, and out pops a little dragon's head, ready to swing around and breathe fire at anything that dares to get in your way, like this foreboding monster right here with a whirlwind behind him. What's he up to? No good, obviously. So you and your dragon egg must go out to defeat him. You collect enough of the special orbs, and the dragon hatches fully, allowing you to ride on its back, spray enemies with fire, and traverse the land, ranging from the woods to high-tech fortresses." So there's a lot going on in Dragon Egg. Seems to be quite in-depth, and happily I can report that even without reading any of this Japanese text here or during the game, this is a PC Engine game that is going to be very accessible to players of all regions, all demographics, because it's a platforming game, and your attacks are to do basically the same thing you would do in a Mario or a Bonk's Adventure type game, where the enemies are blocking your way, you use the attack you're allowed to use to take them out, and you progress from left to right or lower to higher. It doesn't matter whether you scroll horizontally or scroll vertically. You scroll, baby, scroll. That's what you do in a platformer. So there are a couple of cheat codes if you're playing this on authentic PC Engine or TurboGrafx using a EverDrive or Super SD System 3, so thought you should know about these. If you want to get to the sound test, it's up, up, down, down, left, right, 2, 1. Kind of like the Konami code, but not quite. For the level select cheat, you do down, down, up, left, right, 2, 1. So you just invert it a little bit. Once you've done that, you can start at any level you want. Of course, if you're using save states, none of this will matter to you, but I can see how for gamers back in September 1991 when this was released, that would have been a very helpful thing to have. But then again, I don't know if even save states or passwords are going to be super necessary. Now, I'm not saying this game has no challenge, or I wouldn't have enjoyed playing it as much as I did, but I would say it's an approachable level of challenge where most of the difficulty lies in timing your jumps just right, as you can see here, landing so the enemy doesn't attack me where I land, and me being able to attack it before it turns around. And of course, the enemy patterns will vary depending on the level that you are in, so you learn the patterns, you jump on the falling platforms before they disappear forever, and you attack the enemies, and you deal with all the different scenarios that are presented to you. For example, we've got these tree-based enemies that are shooting flaming arrows at you, but if you jump up the tree branches and time it just right, you can use your own fire to attack them back, and here I've also picked up an orb which gave me a dragon upgrade as a result. You're also picking up coins as you go. Not like Mario, where the coins give you a 1-up, but in a way they kind of do, because you can use your coins in shops throughout the game to buy cures to heal yourself, or extra lives, or whatever other things you might want to get from a shop. And thankfully, for whatever reason, the designers of this game put those menu options in English, so they're not so hard to understand when you do actually get to a shop. So it's got a little bit of Wonder Boy 3 to it. It's got a little bit of Mario to it. It's got a little bit of very light RPG elements to it, in that I wouldn't say you're leveling up as such, but at the same time you are upgrading yourself with each orb you pick up, so I guess you could consider that some form of leveling. But it's certainly not point-based, and you're not adjusting your stats as you go through. But then again, you're going to a shop and buying items, so that's why I say it's like very, very light in that respect. If it was top-down instead of side-scrolling, you might even call it Zelda-esque, because you're acquiring items and shopping and improving your abilities as you go along. Now, if I was to dog Dragon Egg for one thing, it would be the fact that they didn't bother to animate a sprite for this boss so he could turn and face you when you jump over him to the other side. But by the same token, when you do jump over him, his backside is where he's vulnerable, so maybe it just makes sense that he can only walk facing one direction, because that just keys you on how to attack him. So even my complaint has to be withdrawn at some point. And as you see, you get a rotating item there at the end. When you jump on it, determines what kind of item it will be. A roulette wheel style option when you beat a boss. I would say Dragon Egg is one that you should definitely go for in emulation. Not so sure about buying it, because as I always say on the PC Engine files, price is a factor. Some of these games are not on the cheap side, and the better they are, the more expensive they can be, or conversely, the more obscure they are, the more expensive they can be. This one's a little bit of both. You can get a complete copy for anywhere from $100 to $130. I almost swallowed the words trying to say that, because even I'm shocked by how much it goes for. But you can get cheaper copies of it. If you get it loose, you can get it for like anywhere from $45 to $70. So what you're looking at is, if you play this outside of emulation, it's going to be a bit of an investment. And I'm guessing if I memorized all the patterns of all of the different monsters and different bosses and different levels, the replayability would go away pretty quickly. Like with these lava falls here, it's only a matter of remembering when to not jump when the lava stops flowing and when to jump before it starts flowing again. So once you've memorized that, you can do it each time and it won't be a challenge the next time. It's not like there's a difficulty setting where you can go from easy to medium to hard to legendary. You're just playing this game the way it is, as it is, and once you've memorized it, would it be fun to play it again? Well, maybe. I'm not going to say not ever play this once you've beaten it, but I don't know if it has the kind of depth that will justify spending $130 for a complete copy. Especially when, from what I've seen of playing it so far for the PC Engine files, these levels are a little on the short side. The sprites are good, not great. The music, no. The music really doesn't do it for me in this game. The music and the sound effects are definitely the weak point. But overall, I'm still giving Dragon Egg a thumbs up, and I'm telling you, you should try it, even if you don't buy it. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the PC Engine Files. I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and this is Batman for PC Engine, released in 1990 by Sunsoft, released only in Japan. And that's just one of many weird things about this game. I debated long and hard before deciding to include this one on the PC Engine Files because I have very fond memories of side-scrolling, platforming, action-style Batman games, and they were also developed by Sunsoft. My particular favorite was on the original Game Boy, DMG 01 as we know it, and I had a copy of that game as a kid before it got stolen and played it to death and can probably still hum the melodies of that game just at will anytime because I burned them into my brain. So that is the kind of Batman experience I came to expect. Now, truthfully, this one is a little more faithful to the Batman mythos because you're stunning your enemies with a batarang and then knocking them out. Whereas in the Batman game that I played on Game Boy and in several of the other games, Batman is decidedly more lethal with his weapons. So, if you want to understand Batman from the perspective of he doesn't kill, sure, that's what the comic books portrayed him as. If somebody died, it was not because he intentionally killed them, but because they made a mistake trying to escape from him or were so treacherous and duplicitous they brought about their own ends. Even though Batman would have willingly saved them, they pretty much sacrificed themselves rather than be brought to justice. So, I expected something along the lines of the Game Boy game the first time I played this, or at least the NES or Genesis games, and instead, it's like Batman meets Boxel, Bomberman, some sort of maze game, maybe even Pac-Man. I mean, okay, what we have here is a top-down, semi-three-dimensional perspective, but really the walls are just made to look like they're at an angle, but everything is flat. That's not a problem. I don't mind that. It's actually kind of Pac-Mania-esque in that respect, although Pac-Mania had more of a tilted angle closer to an isometric perspective, but I don't mind that part. What I'm not so fond of with this Batman game is the fact that there are single paths to move on that are only one space wide in terms of the size of your character, your Batman protagonist, Bruce Wayne, if you will. And Games like that, I mean, if it's a Hyankyo alien type game where you're digging holes to trap enemies and then burying them in the holes and scoring points based on that, I mean, I get it. You would want everything to move along one straight line forward or back. And that's where it also compares to Bomberman because it's the same idea. When you're setting bombs to blow up enemies, you want them to only be on one line. You don't want them to evade. You want them moving either horizontally or vertically. It has to be restrictive for both you and the enemy. But restrictive is definitely the word that comes to mind with this Batman game because when you can only move along the set paths and the enemies can only move along the set paths and all you're doing is going around picking up items until the level ends, it feels very forced and very restrictive, and it doesn't allow for a lot of freedom or innovation in the way that you play the game. That's the thing that made platformers like Mario Brothers so much fun because there was an infinite number of ways you could solve it. If you're a speedrunner, there's only one or two ways to solve it. But if you're just playing for the fun of it, you can choose to hit a power block or not. You can choose to jump on an enemy or not. You can choose to go over or under. You can go any which way you want to get to your goal. There's no freedom of that in Batman for PC Engine. You have to follow the path. You have to pick up the items, and sometimes you have to pick up just the right item to unlock the next room that the path will lead you to. It's all very scripted and constrictive, and the only real differences you'll find are that the green-colored enemies will charge at you when you come into their line of vision, so you have to be prepared to hit them with a batarang really fast compared to the other henchmen that are in the level. Other than that, there's no variation. Just rinse, lather, repeat. In fact, the names of the levels don't even change from one maze to the next. It's like Gotham City Stage 2, Gotham City Stage 3, Gotham City Stage 5. I mean, it's mind-numbing. And there's been some speculation over the years as, well, why didn't they release this on TurboGrafx? Because it was such a big franchise at the time. The Tim Burton movie was huge. Everybody remembers Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. It was a big hit. It was huge at the box office. I went and saw it as a kid. I remember how big it was. So you would think that taking that license, which this game, in fact, it is directly licensed from the movie, they would want to capitalize on that in one of the biggest markets for the movie. They never did. Maybe there was some sort of contractual problem with the movie rights. Maybe it was the fact there were already successful games released on Nintendo products and the TurboGrafx didn't really have a good market foothold compared to that. Maybe it was some combination of the two. Maybe there was North American exclusive licensing movie rights that went to Nintendo that didn't allow something on a similar platform, even though Batman games came to Sega Genesis, so I can't really think that was the reason. I think the reason was they just realized it wasn't that much fun. They slapped a Batman license on something and sold it in Japan, and then were like, yeah, gamers aren't going to go for this in the West because they're already used to a side-scrolling Batman game, and this is a maze game, and it's just not going to culturally cross the gap or sell that many units. So they didn't try. And to me, I think they made the right decision. This would not have been viewed well if it came out in North America back then. Now, with all that said, is this a terrible game? No. It's playable. The music's good. If you like maze games, it's fine. I guess I would say, if it wasn't called Batman, I'd probably like it a lot more. But when you call something Batman, you raise the expectations. It's the same problem you have if you make a Spider-Man game or an Incredible Hulk game. you're going to have to give people what they expect from that. If it's a Spider-Man game, you've got to be slinging webs and weaving your way through buildings. If it's an Incredible Hulk building, you've got to be super strong and smash your way through things. In a Batman game, you should be stealthy and action-packed, and this game is not that. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and today we're looking at Kaizu Chojin Shubibin Man. Please don't ask me to say that twice, I don't think I can. Now this series has a somewhat convoluted history because it's a franchise with 4 games in it created by Messiah, but only one of those 4 entries was officially localized for the United States, and it's called Shockman. So if you know that TurboGrafx game, it's actually the second game in the series. The one we're looking at today is the first. And they changed up some things from the first to the second game. They made it a little more like Mega Man, which is why Shockman is often called the Mega Man of the TurboGrafx. But I think that's kind of doing it a disservice, and I think it's also doing this franchise a disservice. So let's talk about the first entry in the series. As you can see, you have your choice of 2 protagonists, one named Tasuke and one named Cupiko, and you can play individually or 2 players together if you have 2 controllers. So I can't attest to the 2-player action, but in 1-player mode, it's a side-scrolling platformer where you hit enemies with a sword, collect various items that they drop, such as power-ups and what I'm assuming is yen, because that looks like it's a symbol for money up at the top. And sometimes they even drop bombs, which, when you collect them, destroy all the enemies on the screen. I haven't entirely figured out all of the power-ups yet, but I'm kind of getting the hang of it as I go along, as I'm playing it for today's video. I'm also kind of getting the hang of the platforming jumps, because your character goes forward very slowly, so your jumps have to be very precise. You have to get right to the edge of a platform, jump at just the right time to catch a floating platform, or jump all the way at the edge of one platform to just barely reach the next platform. It's not super forgiving. It reminds me a lot, and this will probably come across as a negative comparison, to Castlevania The Adventure on Game Boy. That's how slow your jumps are. Now, with that said, I don't hate this game, nor do I hate Castlevania The Adventure. I'm just trying to give you a point of reference, and if you don't like a platformer where your jumps are that slow and that finicky, that may be a detriment to your enjoyment of the game, but it doesn't ruin it for me. It just means you have to take your time and be precise. One of the positives is that there are branching paths in this game, so you don't have to play it in any specific order. You can choose your way of progression through the map, and even if you can't read Japanese, it's pretty easy to figure out that you move the cursor to where you want to go and hit the button, and that takes you to that stage. Each stage has a boss at the end, and according to several reviews I've read, they increase in difficulty as you go along. But as you saw a bit earlier in this playthrough, I basically stood in front of the boss and mashed my sword repeatedly until it died. Even if you take a couple hits, you're gonna hit it more and do more damage than it's gonna hit you, so that seems to not be a problem. The only problem is that your life carries over from one stage to the next. It doesn't reset between levels, so if you take too many hits, you're going into the next stage almost completely depowered. So be warned, if you want to try the button mashing strategy, it can work, but it could also backfire on you tremendously. And since I can't speak to the later bosses being more powerful, it's probably true based on the reviews I've seen at places like Video Game Den, so that would be a huge disadvantage if you wanted to try the button mashing strategy. Incidentally, although this franchise looks like it might be based on a manga or anime, to my knowledge it's not. It was Messiah trying to create their own intellectual property that they could license out over multiple games and possibly even get spun off into movies or anime. I don't know that it ever achieved that level of success, but then again, there are 4 games in the series, so it achieved some level of success. And I would say this game got renewed attention, as did the entire franchise, because of a recent re-release of Kaizo Shojin Shibuben Man 4, or if you want to call it Kaizo Shojin Shibuben Man 0, that's the name. It was released on Satellaview in Japan. Satellaview? Yeah, the Super Famicom Satellite Expansion add-on that you could get streamed games from a satellite service to your Super Famicom. And this game was originally supposed to be released in 1994 and got shelved for who knows what reason, showed up on the Satellaview a few years later, and then almost completely disappeared into obscurity until in the 2010s, the rights to it were picked up and it was re-released in a physical form for the first time ever as a Super Famicom cartridge. And if you have a Super Nintendo or you've taken off the Region Protect tabs, you can play that cartridge in your Super Nintendo, or you can try it in emulation, as you can try this game in emulation as well. But be warned, if you want a physical copy, because this series picked up some notoriety with that Super Famicom re-release, the older games are getting more expensive now as well. I've seen a set of the first 3 games for PC Engine going for $150. Shockman Complete in Box, I believe, goes for $50 to $80, maybe more as of the recording of this video. So, not the cheapest title you can get for PC Engine. And this one, this first entry alone, could set you back $50 loose. So, buyer beware, you might want to try before you buy. But it's definitely a fun game if you can get around the fact that there's a bit of a slow jumping action to it, and you have to get, how do I want to say it? Not trying to make a Mega Man pun, but you have to get equipped. You have to get in the frame of mind of these jumps and the timing that it takes to do them. And once you get that down, you can get to these boss battles and make progression through the game. So there's a learning curve here, but it's not insurmountable. There's a little bit of a language barrier, but it's not insurmountable. I'm probably missing some things, but I'm also enjoying it because it's an easy to grasp side-scrolling action platforming game with 2 cutesy cyborg kids who just want to save the world from evil. And if that draws comparisons to Mega Man, well, I guess it would, because Rock and Roll are Dr. Light's children who want to save the world from evil. So call them cyborgs, call them robots, whatever they are, they just want to go out and battle against ne'er-do-wells everywhere. And I suppose the fact that Dr. Wily resides in a fortress that looks like a skull, and the boss of this first game is called Dark Skull, that's just drawing even more incentive to make the comparison. But it wasn't until Shockman that they did away with the sword and gave you a buster weapon of sorts that you could fire at the enemies. So at that point, it was inevitable that the franchises would be compared, but I prefer to think of them as 2 unique, completely different things, especially considering that I find the platforming a lot easier in the Mega Man series of games. It just seems perfectly attenuated to my play style, and this, it's difficult, but it's doable. That's my review of Kaizo Shojin Shibuben Man. I recommend this game. I don't recommend paying high prices for it, but I do recommend trying it because it is a good experience on a PC Engine or an emulator. Thanks for watching.
Go! お前、ここを通りたければ、私と勝負していきなさい。勝負？まさか美少女コンテスト？私 私の美しさにかなうと思って？じゃあない。勝負はぷよぷよ地獄よ。 やったな。
I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This is the PC Engine Files, and you're looking at Morita Shogi PC, which simply means Kazuo Morita's Shogi for the PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16 if you're using SSD 3 or an EverDrive. But the question, of course, is would you want to do that? That's what the PC Engine Files is all about, so I'm going to explain this game a little bit. Shogi is referred to as the Japanese game of chess. It may at first appear to look like chess, but it's on a 9x9 grid instead of the 8x8 that most chess players, in North America at least, would be familiar with. Probably Europe as well. So there's a different set of rules that apply to shogi as compared to chess. For example, these pawns in the front row can only move up one space at the start, whereas in the traditional chess, or perhaps I shouldn't say traditional because Japanese chess is probably older than what I call traditional chess, so let me say European chess. I'm used to chess where a pawn can move two spaces forward at the start, but in shogi, you can only move one. And being that it's on a 9x9 grid, I'm not at all sure what the movements are for individual pieces like the knights, the rooks, the kings, the queens, and it probably doesn't help that many of them are being portrayed here as mythological beasts to give it more of a role-playing game element. For example, this wyvern-looking thing can clearly move on diagonal lines, which is what the AI of the computer opponent was setting up, but I didn't know that going in, so I just lost a pawn right away at the beginning. Not that that's really a bad thing, pawns are always expendable. You generally want to use them to set up other things, but it would have been helpful for me to know which monsters or which pieces on the board can move in different directions. I finally figured out which ones were the knights, and those, like knights from European chess, move up and to the right or up and to the left. They always move in a L shape, or if you want to call it a Tetris rotated L, that's fine too, whatever you would describe that as. So it probably helps if you know Japanese chess going into this, which I did not. And that is not the only thing that I will say is a deficit to this. My incompetence at Japanese chess should not necessarily be a reflection on the game. What is a reflection on the game is the incredibly tediously slow movement of each of the pieces as they are animated to go from one square to the next. This is like Star Wars chess. If you've played versions of it that have the incredibly tedious animations of Chewbacca walking from one square to the next. It takes him forever to get there. There are some versions for certain consoles that speed it up a little. I think the Sega CD is one of the better ones from what I recall, but the premise is of course fun. You want to see Star Wars characters doing battle with each other, but when you have to wait so freaking long for your pieces to move, it kind of takes the fun away from it. Which, even if I knew Japanese chess rules and understood the movements on a 9x9 grid, which I'm not able to formulate in my head because part of chess is thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead and planning where your opponent's going to be and where you're going to be. And on an 8x8 grid, I have a decent grasp of that. Not an expert chess player by any stretch of the imagination, but I at least know what I'm doing to some degree. Here I don't, because the movement options are completely different with the different spaces and the different sets, and it is extremely frustrating trying to do this with a TurboGrafx controller or any sort of keyboard emulation controller if you're doing it that way, as I'm filming this through an emulator to show it all to you. It's just, you want to click on it with a mouse. Good chess games on a computer, you can just drag and drop your pieces and it happens right away, and it's fast and it's fun. It's easy to battle your AI opponent or a human opponent, whatever you're choosing to do. You just drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop. Here you've got to tediously move your cursor to the piece, then move the piece where you want it to go. And if you don't know the rules of shogi, then what you think is a legal move turns out to not be a legal move, and you end up getting stuck. And because I can't read the Japanese text, I started getting error messages, which I assume were telling me that I was leaving my king vulnerable and that I couldn't do a purposefully illegal move like that, so it wasn't going to let me. Had I understood that, it would have been a lot better. But I just hit a brick wall at that point, and I was like, this is slow, this is tedious, this is not doing it for me. Kazuo Morita, I'm sure you are a famous Japanese board game designer, and I highly respect you, sir, but I don't feel like this is a necessary game for me to play on a TurboGrafx or a PC Engine or an emulator or SSD 3 or any freaking way that you can do it. I'm not going to recommend this game. Not every game I show to you on the PC Engine files is something that I would say go out of your way to play. This is definitely not one of those. If you're looking for a cheap game to increase the size of your collection, that might be the only reason to go for this one. You can buy a copy for $17, roundabout, a little more, a little less. Shipping's going to vary depending on what country it comes from. So it's not among the most expensive PC Engine hue cards that are out there. But there's probably a reason for that. I wouldn't say Morita Shogi PC is the kind of title that's in demand because it's cute or charming or a shoot 'em up or a platformer or any combination of those things. It's no core Yoon. It's not going to do it for me. Maybe if you're a die-hard shogi player who really understands Japanese chess and knows the rule set and isn't impeded by the Japanese language barrier when you get an error message, there's some enjoyment to be derived from this. I will say they're trying. I like the fact that they used mythical, fantastical, role-playing game style monsters for the chess pieces. A for effort, it's fine. And they wanted to animate it and make it look cool. Again, A for effort, F- in execution. I don't know what else to add other than that. I would just say thank you to all of the regular viewers of this channel. If you're new to Mr. MegaManFan, please consider subscribing, hit that like button, share the PC Engine files. New episodes air every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I appreciate all your support, and hopefully next time when I see you again, the game will be a little more fun for each and every one of us. Ryo Saiba is a sweeper, a bodyguard for hire, reputedly the finest shot with a gun in all of Shinjuku. He's also a lech, who only accepts beautiful female clients just to get a look at their bodacious bodies. Keeping watch on him is his partner Kaori. She's the sister of his ex-partner Hideyuki, who was killed in the line of duty. Kaori has talents herself, being able to produce enormous mallets seemingly from thin air whenever Ryo is hitting on ladies. She isn't afraid to hit him. That's the plot of City Hunter. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This is the PC Engine files, and that description is based on an entry from the PC Engine Software Bible, with all credit due to them. But even without that description, you might already be familiar with City Hunter. It is a quite popular series of manga, and it has been adapted multiple times into anime and films. As recently as 2019, there was yet another adaptation of City Hunter, and it has had numerous spin-offs as well. Now, owing to the popularity of City Hunter, this game does have a translation patch, which is available courtesy of Cabbage. His website, let me just pull up the URL. Shoot, didn't have it in front of me. Cabbage. What? Oh, pce.cabbage.cx. Sorry about that. Should have had that right in front of me when I was recording this voiceover. But you can get the patch there. However, for the PC Engine files, I decided to play this cold without using the English patch just to see how far a non-Japanese speaker could get in the game. And to my surprise, the answer is pretty darn far, because this game has elements of elevator action and impossible mission 2, and you'll see what I mean by that right away, since you are scrolling from left to right, firing a gun at multiple enemies who come up from you in either direction, trying to take you out with their own guns, and you also have doors that you can go into that have items and power-ups and sometimes entire new levels that you didn't know were there. So aside from actual elevators, it very much has the elevator action feel, and in part of completing a mission where you have to achieve certain goals in order to progress, very much Impossible Mission 2. So City Hunter has a lot going for it and is quite accessible even without the English language patch. So I was having a blast playing this game. My only downfall was that I was unable to find any of the quote-unquote nurses who restore your health. So the more hits I took, the lower in health I got, and this is a one life game. That's why you have such a large life bar. When you get hit too many times, game over, man, game over. So you got to know where they are, and if you don't, you got to be careful. And if you're not careful, you'll wind up dead. I'll be careful. You'll be careful. You'll be dead. Yes, we all know that scene from the cantina. Or was that a bar? Whatever it was. No, the cantina is where the music was playing later. The bar was just a general bar that he happened to be in when he met with Han Solo. He and Ben Kenobi met with him and procured the services of the Millennium Falcon. The cantina was later. I'm getting totally sidetracked here. What am I trying to say? What I'm saying is you have to meet with these characters in these various rooms to get information, get items, progress the game. So once I apply the English patch created by Cabbage, I'm sure some of this will make a lot more sense, but just doing it randomly with no additional help, I still did pretty darn well. I managed to acquire 2 key items in the course of this gameplay, and I don't know when, where, or how I would use them, but the fact I was able to acquire them simply by entering rooms and talking to the NPCs in them made it very easy to obtain progression in this game, and the only thing stopping me was my own health bar. Now, should you try to acquire City Hunter for yourself in a physical form? Well, that's going to be an interesting question, because it is based on a popular manga which was turned into an anime and a series of films, so that does tend to add value for collectors who are, much like my cat, very angry that they can't have everything they want. So you may spend extra money trying to get this game because of the popularity of the series and the number of people who collect anything related to the series. A complete copy can be had for anywhere from $85 to $125. Loose copies, sometimes as low as $90, sometimes as high as $150. Yeah, this is going to be one of those pricey games if you're a collector of PC Engine TurboGrafx 16 games. So I wouldn't normally say this because obviously it's not something I'm going to just outright 100% say this is a preferred way to go about things, but I'm just being honest with you. That's a lot of money to spend on one game, so emulation is a really good way to go with City Hunter. especially since you can apply the English language patch and get even more out of this game. And it's a pretty good game as it is, even without the English patch. But if you can apply it and play it in emulation, even better. And if you have a TurboGrafx 16 and an EverDrive, even better yet. And if you have the Super SD System 3, well then, by God, you're good to go. If you had the incredible good fortune to find a copy of this loose, and you're not living in Japan, and it costs under $20, holy shit, get on that and grab that as fast as you can. I don't see the odds of that being very high. I think the only places you would find this are, ironically enough, in Japan, in places like Shinjuku or Akihabara, probably at a store like Super Potato. I think you would be paying the prices that it's going for on eBay right now because they tend to know what things are worth. So this one, it's tricky because I think you should play it. It's really good. Sometimes with PC Engine games, when I feature them, they're just okay. They're kind of interesting historically. They're undiscovered games. As somebody once told me, it's great that you profile these games because I didn't know about them before I saw your video. And that's great. I want everybody to discover more of the PC Engine library. But I recognize that in doing so, I'm also telling you about some things that can be wildly expensive at times because of the rarity of PC Engine and TurboGrafx games, both in Japan and in North America. Probably even more so the latter. There are still some PC Engine games that you can get for reasonable amounts in Japan, but not all of them, especially if they're not late releases, or not that they're not, got tongue-tied there, sorry. If they're not from the late PC Engine era, if they're not late releases, then maybe the later they are, the more expensive they're likely to be. And the later they are, the more limited the print run will be. And if they're tied into a popular franchise, anime, movie, manga, whatever, that's going to make it even more expensive. And if it's something that's developed a legendary status like Sapphire, then just forget about it. That's hundreds of dollars. Well, in an ideal world, we would all be able to buy all of the games for classic retro consoles, but we don't live in that ideal world. We live in the real world. And in the real world, I just got killed by this person with a flamethrower. So that's where this session of City Hunter will end, but that just means it's time for me to apply the patch and start all over again. So check this one out, but maybe don't spend $150 on it. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and thanks for watching.